We don't hit home runs on this pod. We work station to station. I am back with Dustin and Rob, and we are going to do our first state of the season. And it seems somewhat timely, given that the Jays, I think last year we were kind of, there was anticipation waiting. I don't think we're waiting for anything this year. It has not got off to a good start. Gentlemen, if I could get your brief thoughts on how things have gone up to this point and how you feel about this team, and then we're going to get into some discussion about the batting order.
Yeah, I think we're at a quarter point of this season here. I think we can officially kind of say it's not early anymore. And I'm not feeling too good, honestly. I think I'm starting to realize that it's going to take quite a comeback to right the ship. So it's looking a little bleak, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm on board. I agree with that. Disappointing. This team definitely was not supposed to be in the fifth spot of the American League East. I mean, the third maybe. I mean, definitely we were supposed to be above Boston. So, disappointing first quarter of the season. Lots of things can be done. Lots of things should have been done. To this point, I mean, they saw the bleeding a few weeks ago, and doesn't really seem like anything was being done to address it, but not trending very well. So not happy with this team.
All right. Well, I think Rob alluded to things that can be done with this team, and I think we'll go into the batting order. Dustin, you unfortunately were under the weather when we last discussed the batting order, and we kind of went into it with some more detail. So I wanted to revisit this discussion a little bit and kind of get your input. I just want to understand where your head is at with this team and how you think this batting order should be put together and what changes should be made.
My philosophy for the batting order is generally you want 1, 2, 3 to be your best hitters. Maybe your leadoff guy is somebody that gets on base, and 4, 5, 6 is your kind of sort of average guys, but better sluggers. And then whoever else you got down in the bottom, and hopefully they can get on base for the top of the order. So that's generally the kind of the philosophy that I'm buying into. I mean, if I'm John Schneider, I'm putting the guys that are actually hitting right now in the top. So it's probably Davis Schneider, Dalton Varsho, and Vladdy up top, 1, 2, 3. I'd probably put someone like Danny Jansen 4, then Bo, who's been hitting a little better the last few games, so for now have him there. And then 6 through 9 can be any combination of Turner or Kirk in the DH spot, and then Biggio, IKF, Kiermaier, or George Springer maybe in 6 with those other guys below. I mean, whatever the makeup of the lineup is for the team that day, I don't think that necessarily matters all too much. Maybe you want to mix them up lefty righty if you can, something like that, but I'm not going to sort of fiddle with that part of the order too much.
Well, Dustin, I'm going through and I'm fist pumping your selections because I've divided my batting order, and Rob and I kind of we took a little bit. We were trying to work through. At that point, Vladdy wasn't hitting as well as he is now, so it was kind of trying to figure out how we were going to kind of construct things, and we kind of thought we wanted to split up the Springer, Bo, and Vladdy. But I think I've kind of split it up into right now versus when these guys are performing, because I think Bo's coming back. Vladdy's obviously hitting really well right now. But yeah, it's got to be David Schneider, Varsho, Vladdy, Jansen, Bo. You listed all those. And then I have Justin Turner, George Springer, and then I have a IKF / Clement. So let's, the third base hole. And then Biggio. Of course, if Kirk is coming in to catch for Jansen that day, I think he probably has to go down at the bottom. Obviously, he's not really hitting very well. But I think I'm a little bit biased but I think you're bang on in terms of how this batting order should be constructed currently at the moment. Going forward, though, I would like to propose that if Bo Bichette is back doing Bo Bichette things, that he's our leadoff hitter.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's an argument there. I mean, he can make contact. He's a good two-strike guy. I mean, I think we don't really have a true leadoff guy on this team right now anyway. So when he was hitting good, you can make an argument for Justin Turner leading off. I mean, at the beginning of the year, he was getting on base and hitting doubles. So, I mean, that's just as good as anybody. So yeah, I'm not against that. I mean, I guess it's the same question for David Schneider. Do you want him coming up with nobody on or with somebody on, right?
My solution to that problem, Dustin, is to put David Schneider at number 2. So after Bo Bichette gets a hit, which we know he can do, David Schneider comes up number 2. We have Vladdy, who's obviously just raking right now. At number 3, I have Danny Jansen. And then in the 5th hole, I'm really hoping that he puts this back together. But I think 5-hole Springer, Varsho, Turner, and then, of course, the IKF, Clement, and Biggio are the last 2 spots. But I think this really gives a lot more length to this batting order where, you don't have Turner hitting 3rd or 4th because, well, he's not really hitting that well, right?
I think I'm going to intervene here. I think the problem here is George Springer. He's not hitting, and he should not be in the number 1 spot. And we've seen a couple of games with Schneider as the leadoff, 1 or 2, Bo 1, 2, 3, Laddie 3, 4. I think what the wrench here is George Springer just not hitting, and he needs to be dropped in the lineup. And then they're going to construct it whichever way they see fit. I mean, a case can be made for anything, but something needs to be done with George. He needs to be dropped in the lineup. I mean, if they're going to do it to Bo, I know George is getting a lot more money, and he was their top guy, but you also got to send a message to say if you're not contributing, if you're not hitting, then you're going to be dropped down. Because I think this team is better when George Springer is not leading off right now.
My question would be to you guys is, why do we think that George Springer is leading off at this point? We've had a couple games where David Schneider is let off because George Springer was sick and, was fairly successful. Today's game, George is back there.
I think it's the khakis, as Parker says. We're paying this guy a lot of money. He needs to be at the top of the order. And he's a veteran guy. That's where he belongs for whatever reason. I mean, he doesn't belong there now, but I think it's basically coming from the higher ups. I would hope that John Schneider would be like, I don't like this, but I've got to do it because my bosses want me to do it. The analytics say that.
What analytics would tell you to hit George Springer right now at the top of the lineup? There's no analytics on the planet that would tell you to do that.
I don't disagree.
Well, I don't think it is the khakis. Like what I'm saying is it's the opposite of the khakis. It's either trying to please George Springer or you've got some kind of, you're pot committed to him, or maybe he's got some kind of contract stipulation in it that says, he's got to play X number of games per season at the leadoff spot. Like, who knows?
But didn't they drop him last year?
Not for long.
But he was still dropped. So it's like, why not do the same thing? See if he comes around and then put him back up. But I found that the couple of games that they had where Schneider was leading off and George Springer wasn't in the lineup, they were actually a better team. I mean, it's a small sample size.
Well, Rob, this one thing I think that John Schneider is behind. I think it's him trying to provide some confidence so that this player can perform, except that it's just not working. And I think George Springer has the most at-bats of any player on the team right now. And by almost any metric, he is, in terms of regular players that are in the lineup, he's easily the worst. I don't think it's even close. And Dustin might be right in terms of the contract thing, but what might be in the contract it might be a percentage, right? So there might be a percentage of George Springer is going to be in the leadoff
for 100 games of the year.
Yeah, games or a percentage of games or something like that. I don't know. I guess it's a possibility given what we've seen. Maybe that is a khakis thing then. The khakis are saying, hey, John, his contract says this, so you gotta You got to play him as that, right? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't actually think that's the case, but that would make some sense. I mean, to me, it's John Schneider trying to be a player's guy. He's trying to course correct on some kind of, maybe there was a little bit of like he lost the room last year or some kind of, he's trying to, I don't know, man. The reason why I'm grasping at straws is like it sort of defies explanation, to be honest. I mean, everybody that's talking about it out there and, Blue Jays commentary land is talking about this, and I haven't heard a good explanation for it.
Yeah, that's my point, right? Like it's there. We've seen the games. They don't want to disrupt the lineup. They want to keep the status quo, but they're going to drop Bo. I mean, Bo's kind of the fall guy, right? Vladdy didn't do well. They kept him. They could have dropped him. Bo didn't do well. They dropped him. Springer's not doing well. They keep him. So I don't know what the rationale is either, but it's not working.
Well, I'm going to put this out there, Rob. I don't think George Springer should be your leadoff hitter. Like, I think it's done. I think it's done for him. I don't think
Yeah, I agree.
it's diminishing returns. He wasn't that great. He played, I think he played the most amount of games in 5 years last year, and he did not perform very, he was okay, but not, $20+ million good. And I don't think he's a leadoff hitter anymore. I would like to see him dropped. In my ideal batting order, I have him as 5th, right? Because I think he can hit some home runs, drive some guys in. Maybe it takes a little pressure off him, but he's making outs in 3 pitches, and it's just not the way that you want to start a game. And I think there are better players. I think we've seen better players. I think it's great that David Schneider's got that opportunity. He's been given this opportunity this year, and he's ran with it, right? And I think he's not the ideal leadoff hitter that I want to see. And we're going to talk about David Schneider a little bit more in a little bit. And I actually have something else that I want to suggest in terms of his future. But George Springer, for me, he's not a leadoff guy anymore. And the more that I see him leading off and not performing, it just, it sticks in my craw.
Mm-hmm.
Flying under the radar is Mr. Justin Turner. Justin Turner, of course, signed in the offseason. He had a great start to the year. Everyone was applauding this signing. Justin Turner has fallen on hard times. In the month of May, he has 33 at-bats and 3 hits. If you do the math, that is a .090 batting average. So he's definitely fallen on hard times. Now, I wanted your guys' opinion on, is this what Justin Turner is going to be the rest of the year? Is this just kind of a valley, and maybe the beginning of the season was a peak? But what do we think Justin Turner is going to be the rest of the season? Is he going to fizzle? Like, where do we see him on this team?
And not just what you said, not just the month of May. I mean, if you look back at his last 20 games, he's hitting like 176. I was looking at his splits earlier, like with a 520 OPS. It's not good. So I think he's maybe escaped some criticism because, one, the overall team is bad. Some other guys are not performing. And, he did have a pretty good start. He might just be kind of a streaky guy. Some players are just like that. They'll go on a hot streak, and then they'll cool off, and then they'll, come back again. So, we haven't seen him enough to know whether that's the kind of player he is, and I haven't looked into, sort of his splits for other seasons, but that could be it. There's nothing in his numbers that I looked at over the last 2 years that tells me that he's necessarily like falling off, like it's a decline. I mean, I guess it could be. But yeah, he's not been good, and I think they need to maybe sit him a little bit more than they have been.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just more of a slump. I mean, he's a veteran guy. He'll figure it out. Yeah, he probably doesn't need to be at the 3 or 4 spot. Maybe you again put him a little bit lower in a lineup, and maybe like Alex, you said, it kind of stretches it out, stretches the lineup a little bit. But I think it's just more of a slump for him. Is he playing every day?
He's playing most days. He was on the bench today, but I think he was sick on the last few days, like a bunch of other players.
I think that's part of it too. Is I know he did have that flu like Springer had, so he's probably still recovering. I think it's just more of a slump. I think he'll come around, but maybe it's time to put him a little bit lower in the lineup and stretching it out and having your top guys as like we said, Schneider, Varsho, Bo, Vladdy, Jansen. Those are sort of your 1 through 5 guys, and then your 6, 7, 8, 9 that is a kind of a rotating door with whoever needs to play. But I think your 2 veteran older guys, Springer and Turner, need to be dropped. For Turner, I think it's just a bad run right now.
I'm in the slump camp too, Rob. I think eye test wise, like he's making a lot of outs, but I still feel like he's having pretty good at bats. He's making decent contact. I feel like it's like the classic kind of like line out, the line out to the right fielder. If it was 10 feet in either direction, it might have got down for a hit, but it just seems like he is finding a lot of gloves with the with the balls that come off his bat. All right, we are going to take a break, and we're going to be back to talk about some positives. Let's talk about some positives that we can find on this team. And I think there are not very many of them, but I think the 2 positives, and probably for a little bit different reasons, but we have Dalton Varsho and David Schneider, Dustin.
Yeah, I'm happy to see Varsho have some success in recent months, especially since, he got a lot of probably undue hatred for, being involved in that trade last year that sent some fairly popular players away, and then he didn't really perform nearly to the level that they had been doing for their new team. And now, he's kind of more of a fixture on the team, and maybe a little more comfort. And, we're seeing some good success from him on the bat, but also, providing that elite defense in the field. As, we saw in that first game against Baltimore, he stole a home run and then hit one himself. So he's having some big impacts on the game. So I'm happy to see that happen, because, I like him. I think he's one of my kind of favorite players on the team right now. And then David Schneider, is good to see him having some success as well. I think that some people thought that, based on his, draft spot and maybe the way that he came into the season last year and debuted, and they thought maybe he was just a flash in the pan, and then, they would figure him out and the league would kind of chew him up and spit him out. But he's been able to adjust, and he's been able to stick. I mean, we're sitting here talking about putting him in the leadoff spot. I mean, that's, that says a lot about how he's made a name and made a spot for himself on the team. So, yeah, those are 2 great positives. And, I'm hoping that we can have a lot more positives to talk about, even if, the team as a whole kind of falls off.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Dustin said. I mean, I'm not going to just reiterate everything. So, I mean, I'll give some honorable mentions too to like Yimi Garcia, Jose Barrios, and Danny Jansen too, because they've been some positives as well.
Rob, I think that's actually a really good point, because we're so focused on the offense, we forget that Jose Barrios may be in the Cy Young finalists this year. Danny Jansen hitting really well. Jimmy Garcia is basically our top, our highest leverage reliever. So all those guys definitely have brought some positive play to the team. Dalton Varsho and David Schneider, like they seem to bring different things. Dalton Varsho just seems to bring that all around defensive game to the outfield. Like he just is he's just a hoover out in center field, and took a home run away from the Orioles on Monday. Essentially saved and won the game for the Jays. Now on the flip side of that, David Schneider not the greatest defensively. He's okay. And I think A for effort at all times, but definitely not Dalton Varsho. I would like to submit that, and this is not something that would be for this year. But what if if we were able to bring in some, I guess, better players who can, they can hit, also play defense. How about David Schneider as a future designated hitter for this team?
I mean, I guess it's possible. I just think it's still too early for that.
Yeah, I'm not saying now. I think like down the line, you know what, Davis, don't worry about troubling yourself in left field. We just want you to mash. And you know what? He can mash.
Yeah, there's an argument for that. I think it's just you're gonna kind of find that guy, naturally based on the defensive, failure or whatever you want to call it, or just how the team is made up. I mean, I know that Orelvis Martinez is a rookie down in AAA right now who's hitting the cover off the ball, but part of the reason why he's not been brought up is that his natural position is second base, and we got a fairly sort of log jam situation there right now on the major league team, and even if there weren't, his defense is not great. So maybe within a year or two he comes up and he ends up in the DH spot. I don't think David Schneider's kind of a liability, let's say, on the defense side. So I wouldn't say he needs to be there yet, or I wouldn't even say that he's kind of on that track. But I mean, maybe I guess it'll, like I said, kind of work itself out.
I think if you start, sorry, like I know we might talk about if they break it down. So I mean, if for some reason they tear it down, trade Bo, trade Vladdy, trade whoever, right? And you still have the new young core, young core version 2, where you have Ernie Clement, Spencer Horowitz, Orelvis Martinez. You have those guys, and then you're splitting maybe some time with Schneider as a DH, and then days that he's not going to play in left field or second base, you put him as a DH as a transition. But I still think, yeah, it's too early. He's young. Get him out there, get him playing in the field. He becomes better in the field, and he still hits. If by some chance he does DH and he does hit better as a DH, then yeah, you could transition him to that as a full-time, but I think it's still too early for that move.
Yeah, and he's still got some legs, right? He's a young guy. 27 games in left field, 10 games at second base. So it seems like they're giving him more opportunities in left field. And my thinking was more that I think it seems to be easier to find a corner outfielder that can hit that can still play some okay defense than maybe a second baseman. And so that's why I thought maybe if you brought in a corner outfielder at some point, or maybe there's someone in the system that comes up and shows themselves, you could maybe slide David Schneider over. And he seems, even when he makes outs, like how many fly balls has he hit to to the fence this year that have been outs, right? So he just seems to be able to, when he gets good, he seems to make good contact when he does hit the ball, and that's why I'm thinking, you know what, if he focuses on that, then maybe that's something for the future. As I said, not now, maybe not even next year, but something maybe down the line that you could mold him into.
You could also consider Danny Jansen for that DH spot. And there's also kind of first base to look at. I know there's Vladdy there right now, and, probably most of us would hope that he stays on the team and figures himself out. But if he doesn't end up on this team in the future, that's a spot maybe for someone like David Schneider. And again, like I said, Danny Jansen, I mean, I know he's a catcher and you want him to do that as long as he can, but it is a fairly rough position on the body. And if you want to keep his bat around, maybe you consider him as a DH or first baseman.
Speaking of Blue Jays personnel with the last name Schneider, let's move on to speaking about or discussing John Schneider. And right now the Jays, I guess maybe give an overview because we haven't really talked about that yet. They're 19-23, last in the AL East. They're 8.5 games back of first place in first for the division, 5.5 back of the wild card. They have the same amount of wins as the Oakland A's, and they have less wins than the Detroit Tigers. They also have, for the cherry on top of the shit cake, they have a minus 47 run differential, which is the second worst in the AL. What happens with John Schneider?
My prediction would be that, he's going to get fired at some point in this year. I think earlier, maybe a week ago, I was thinking, by the end of May. That's looking a little less likely now. I think they've kind of sputtered along and had some success and shown that, maybe they can figure it out, maybe, but I think if May doesn't go well, like if the stretch against the White Sox and the Tigers does not go well and they're still under 500 at the end of May, it's definitely going to happen in June. It's unfortunate. I mean, I don't think that he necessarily deserves to get fired. I don't think he's the one telling them to not hit. I mean, but that is a lever they can pull, and they might have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be the fall guy. You might have the higher ups saying one thing, you have the players doing something else, and he's the guy in the middle. And if you're not winning games and you're not trading guys, then it's going to be him. I don't like when they get rid of managers so soon. I mean, he's really only had a full year of managing the team, and I mean, he's got a successful record with the Bows and the Vladdies when they won their minor league championship. But this is the majors, and I don't think he's calling all the shots. I think people above him are telling him what to do, and he's trying to manage it. But yeah, I mean, if they're not turning it around and they start busting up this team, he's probably going to be the first guy to go.
Well, I definitely think he's going to be the fall guy if things don't pick up. Do I think he should be the fall guy? No, I think we are going to talk about a bit later some other people that should be fall guys and probably more responsible for the current state of this team. But should John Schneider be fired, in your opinion, who should take over for the rest of the year?
I mean, who will is probably Don Mattingly will get, promoted as the interim. And then, depending on what happens with the rest of the front office, there'll be some kind of, search in the off season. I don't think that Don Mattingly is going to end up as the manager next year. That's just my gut feeling. I don't really have a rationale for that. I just feel like, he was here because he saw a window to win sort of one last championship kind of thing. And I don't think he necessarily wants to manage a rebuild team. If that's the kind of, if you're firing John Schneider and then you're firing, Ross Atkins and you're doing some kind of crazy rebuild, I mean, I don't think he's going to be wanting to manage that. But he'll be the interim manager.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, he's got more managerial experience than Hale. So, I mean, Hale could potentially be the new guy, next year and part of the rebuild if there is one. But I don't know if it would just be Hale. I think it would probably go to Mattingly first to finish out the season.
I'm going to weigh in on this and say that Don Mattingly will be a mistake for the rest of the year. If they hire Don Mattingly, I think the players down tools. I actually think that it will be worse under Don Mattingly because I just don't think that he's going to inspire any sort of play from this team. I would tap DeMarlo Hale on the shoulder and say, "You got this. You got this to run with," and I would give him the rest of the season. I would not bring him back next year because, Rob, I went through all of the Jays managers in the Blue Jays history. They have had, I believe, 13 managers, and there is almost one consistent theme with all of these managers, is that basically Blue Jays managers don't manage with any other team. The only Blue Jays managers in the history of the club to go on and manage a team after they've managed the Blue Jays are Bobby Cox, Jimmy Williams, and John Farrell. Jim Fregosi had some managerial experience. He was with the Angels, the White Sox, and the Phillies. These were all before. He did not get hired as a manager after. I'm going to list off some of these names, and all of these guys were never given a look by any other teams. And this is something that has to change on the Blue Jays. So I'm of the opinion you give it to DeMarlo Hale. If John Schneider does get fired, let him run to the end of the season, and then you bring in someone, legit. Now there could be other moves involved, as you said, but so we have Cito Gaston, 2 stints with the Blue Jays, no one else. Obviously very successful in his first one. Tim Johnson, 1 season. Jim Fregosi, Buck Martinez. Well, it speaks for itself. He was terrible. Carlos Tosca, terrible. John Gibbons. We all love Boomhauer, 2 stints, but not the most successful. Not successful enough to get a managerial job. Of course, he is the bench coach of the Mets right now, and he has worked for the Braves and the Royals. But again, he has not managed anywhere else. John Farrell, of course, 1 season, then off he went to the Red Sox. Charlie Montoyo, he was one and done. And John Schneider. So I'm interested to see if John Schneider, when he does eventually leave the Blue Jays, does he get another look? But there's a very common theme with this team of giving young managers a chance. Is it working? I'm going to say it's not.
Young managers are great when you have a young team and they can come up together, and that's when it works. But in my opinion, John Schneider was a bad choice, whatever, 2 years ago or whenever it happened. This team was in a win window. They needed somebody with some chops and some experience and some inspiration, like somebody that could inspire the team, somebody that maybe had done it before. I thought at the time that John Schneider was probably not a great choice. And it turns out it wasn't really. I mean, you can look at his winning percentage. I mean, that's probably something you could say is like, well, he won, but the team was pretty good. He took the team from basically somewhere around 500 at whenever they fired Montoyo, and then he brought it up to a 90-win team, and it was pretty hot that year in 22. But I just think he just hasn't. I don't know if he just doesn't have the personnel management skills that was needed on sort of a veteran team like this.
Changes are coming. It's somewhere, and whether he's going to be around or not is, I guess, debatable. But something has to be done. So he's going to be the fall guy. And if he goes, I'm not going to be too heartbroken. I just don't like when the team is disrupted so much, because it just seems that they're going to be taking not 1 step forward, it's going to be 2 steps back, and then the rebuild has to come, because I don't know what other new manager would do to this team to make it better, other than being more aggressive with changing the lineup.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the key, is like when he changes that, when he moves George Springer down, when he changes things around, when he tries to do something to win, that they kind of go, yeah, I see what you're doing, and they accept it. Like Bo accepted moving down probably because he just is probably the person that's most hard on himself, and so he's yeah, I'm not doing good.
And they have a report, so I'm sure when he went to Bo and said we're moving you down, Bo was probably like, oh, okay. But then when Springer was saying, oh, when you're going to move down, Springer's like, no, I've got more years in this league than you do. you don't tell me what to do. So it could be a respect thing that maybe it's the Don Mattingly that's going to be like, no, you're moving down because I'm the manager and that's what I said.
We all agree that John Schneider's going to be the fall guy. Give me a date when you think this is going to happen.
I think after the All-Star break.
Ooh.
I think if they're still where they are now at the All-Star break, then he goes.
I think it happens before. I think it happens. I still kind of feel like it's going to happen towards the end of May. Unless they have some crazy run against, White Sox and they get back above 500. But if they're below 500 at the end of May, and if they don't do well against those two teams, Detroit and Chicago, I mean, I don't see how you can keep this going another month.
Like, he just seems to be that it's like really bad, and then they're like, okay, this is the game, and then they come out with a win
I know.
or a good game or a comeback, and then they're like, okay, he saved his arse for another couple of games, and then they do not good on a couple of games, and then it's like, all right, one more game, and then they win, and he's like keeping his head above water, right? So at one point a decision has to be made, and yeah, I mean, it's a valid point that they're coming up with supposedly a relatively soft spot in the schedule. The Jays could have won today. We don't know what would have happened yesterday. If they would have won today, that would have been good. They're off tomorrow, and now they're going to play Tampa. Maybe they make a little bit of ground in the division against Tampa. I doubt it, but maybe. But yeah, if you can't win against the Detroit and against who else are they playing? Detroit and
Chicago White
and
Sox.
Chicago. Yeah, if you can't come out with definitely series wins, yeah, then the axe is gonna fall.
If you want a date, Al, I'm gonna say June 6th.
When was Montoyo fired? Wasn't that July?
No,
Or was it before the All-Star break?
It was before. I don't remember the exact time.
All right, so Rob's going to say after the All-Star break?
Yeah, I'll say after the All-Star break because they're going to see how their record is, and then depending on what trades may or may not happen. But if they're where they are now, I think he goes.
Okay, I'm going to say June 15th. June's going to be a slog, and he doesn't survive. So I'll say June 15th. All right, we're going to take a break, and we're going to talk about big-time moves of this team. All right, so going into this weekend, the Jays have a 3-game set at home versus the Tampa Bay Rays. As I mentioned to you, Dustin and Rob, this series does really feel like the season is hanging in the balance. It's kind of a must-series win, and it's a must-series win because this team is just not playing well. It's not performing as it should. And we're going to talk about what we think or what should happen with this team. And so I'm going to start with Dustin. We've already established that you believe John Schneider will be fired. Tell me what you think should happen with this team, Dustin.
Well, I think you're right that, this coming stretch against Tampa, Chicago, Detroit, and then Chicago again is kind of the hinge point. We have two paths laid out in front of us. One path, they go on a crazy run during this, 12 games or whatever it is, 13 games, and, they're back above 500 and everybody's happy and we're all happy in roses and nothing changes. And they play out the rest of the season and maybe they squeak into the playoffs and, who knows from there. So that's one path that's probably very unlikely. We were looking together at the playoff odds. I think that's that 24% that, they make the playoffs right now is their odds on Fangraphs. That's that path. The other path, the more likely path, is that they kind of muddle along again through these games. They don't look great. Maybe they look good for a couple games here and there, but they're still below 500 at the end of May. For me, if that happens, yeah, you fire John Schneider, and if you do that, I think you got to fire Ross Atkins as well. I think that, like I was saying earlier, that firing John Schneider is basically saying we're not competitive. We're not going to win this year. We need to do maybe not a full like rebuild, but like a soft kind of reload and figure out what we're doing for the next few years. Are we going to try and sort of maybe sell a couple pieces off at the trade deadline here, get a few kind of edge, prospects that are almost ready, and then try and make another window in 26, 27. And if that's the case, like if you're wanting to kind of make some trades and make some deals here in the trade deadline, maybe you're trying to trade like a Jimmy Garcia or like somebody with some value that is close to their contract being out. I think Jordan Romano's like got 1 year left on his deal. You say Kikuchi is a free agent, and maybe even looking to trade, one of Bo or Vladdy or something like that. But if you're going to do that, I don't know if I trust Ross Atkins to do that. The team like right now is the product of a Ross Atkins rebuild. Do we want that again? Like, do we trust that? And if you don't trust that, if you don't trust him to do the rebuild or reload or whatever you want to call it, why are you going to trust him to like handle the trade deadline this year? So to me, like if that's the situation you're finding in and you're saying, okay, we're not going to make the playoffs this year, we're going to kind of retool. I think you got to fire Ross Atkins and get somebody with enough time before the trade deadline that can kind of hit the ground running and be there to at least make some good moves and make some good trades, because I don't think Ross Atkins has a good record of like selling at the deadline.
I don't think Ross Atkins goes until the end of the season. I think he's there all year, whether they get rid of Schneider, whether they make trades, sign free agents. I think he will be part of that. And if he does do those moves and the team does not stay the same or does not get better or actually get worse, then he goes. But I don't think the GMs really get fired mid-season. With that being said, if it did happen, I would be happy because I don't think he's doing a good job with this team.
Well, Blue Jays fans might be celebrating in the streets if that happens mid-season. Talking about what we think and what will happen, I'm not so. I don't think Ross Atkins is going to get canned during the season, but that's 100% which like him being relieved of his duties is what should happen. He is the one. He's the executive vice president of baseball operations for this team. He's responsible for everything that happens on the field. And the issue has been the roster construction, right? We can blame John Schneider for decisions here and there, but to get today against Baltimore, I thought again he had a pretty good game. They give up a walk-off home run to Adley Rutschman, which happens. He's probably going to be a generational catcher for the Baltimore Orioles. So I don't know if I really blame John Schneider for that. But it's just the roster construction. This team cannot hit. It can't slug.
And that's the thing. You're not going to win a ball game in American League East with 2 runs.
No, you're not.
So it's is Romano going to close and be successful on every single game? No, he's going to have his mishaps. He's coming in like that's not even leverage. That's like super high leverage. Like so. If you're constructing a team with guys that aren't hitting, then you need to go.
So the other thing that I wanted to just kind of touch on is that I do think that there are the players that are going to get moved or likely to get moved. I think you touched on all of them. And you know what? On the broadcast, they've already talked about this. Jimmy Garcia, Jordan Romano, Kikuchi, Danny Jansen. These are all guys that have a little bit of value, are, facing free agency. So you would, move them on, get some prospects back. But I think basically Mark Shapiro, I think he's going to show his hand if he allows Ross Atkins to trade either Bo or Vladdy. Ross Atkins ain't going anywhere, boys. Right? Now, if we don't see that either of them moved, that's that's Mark Shapiro putting the cuffs on him and saying, no, you're not gonna. I don't trust you enough to, deal these assets and get anything back. I can see Ross Atkins dealing those 4 guys. Ross Atkins staying around to the end of the season and then getting shit canned. Now, if things go really bad, as they very well could, yes, do it now. Let's get it. Let's get ahead of this, right? Let's get ahead of the game. If we're not going to, be in the playoff conversation, why waste fucking time? Like there's no reason to do that. Now the problem, you know what the problem is that this team just spent $300 million on a stadium upgrade, and they're now trying to sell Maple Leaf like luxury boxes. How the hell are you going to do that when this team is this bad? And this is a really tough spot for Shapiro. And so a lot of people think that while, maybe they do fire Ross Atkins, but when we talk about blowing it up and rebuilding, a lot of people think that's not going to happen because, Rogers or Shapiro is just not going to let that happen. I don't know, right? Like I think a blow up should happen, right? I think that's, and in fact, I'm pretty sure I messaged you the first week of the season, Dustin. I was like, this team ain't it. It's not it. This team needs to be blown up, and it's just not the right mix of players. Other than Justin Turner, who just parachuted into this, this situation, like where's the leadership on this team, right? Where's the leadership on this team when, Vladimir Guerrero is missing routine plays at first base to end innings, right? And Vladdy's turned it around big time, and credit to him, right? He's absolutely tearing the cover off the ball right now, and I don't think teams want to pitch to him at the moment. 3 weeks ago, they didn't give a shit. They would have thrown him anything. They would have thrown right down the middle, and he wasn't going to miss it, right? But Ross Atkins and his baseball people made the decision we talked about in the offseason to run it back. His team run it back. And I told you, Dustin, that the only teams where this is successful is where they're very close to winning. I guess in baseball terms, you made it to the World Series, or you lost in Game 7 in the ALCS. Maybe you had the best record in the American League, and you almost made it to the World Series, but like you had the right makeup, or maybe there was a untimely injury to a key player. You can't run it back when you fall ass backwards into the playoffs like they did last year. Like they were celebrating not even their own achievement last year. They were celebrating Seattle losing. That's what they did. And so Ross Atkins decides, okay, I'm going to pick up Justin Turner. We all agreed that was an okay signing, and I'm not going to change my opinion on it. But what else? What else is done? Re-signing Kevin Kiermaier? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like that's like in December? Like this was the slowest free agent market in, I don't know, in my memory. And you're gonna jump on Kevin Kiermaier in December? Like, are you fucking kidding me? This team and the way he's managed it is just a complete joke, right? The Athletic just did they polled basically the teams and who has the best front office, like the top 10 front offices. And of course, were the Jays in that list? No, they weren't in that list. And everybody that weighed in on this is like, well, obviously they're not in on it because they're not that good. Because Ross Atkins isn't that good of a GM or vice president of baseball operations. Like he has run the Vladdy and Bo ship into the ground, and for that he should be walked off the plank.
Yeah, you're right. I think here's the thing. I think your point about the stadium rebuild and them trying to sell seats. I mean, I think they thought that the next few years would be at least competitive and would put people in the seats and would sell tickets. The way that this season is going is turning out it's not going to be that case again, unless they have some kind of miracle. But to me, I think the move that will happen is that they do kind of like, I don't know if you want to call it like a reload. Not necessarily they'll blow it up and sell the whole team and, we're not going to be competitive for another 3 years. They're going to keep the assets that have some value, that have long-term kind of control. They're going to sell the assets, the players that have value, like I said, like you say, Kikuchi, like I don't know, maybe like I said, Jordan Romano, some people with some short-term control. Maybe Justin Turner. Maybe somebody wants to take a flyer on him. Just sell some people up that they can. That's not going to hurt them. 2 or 3 years down the line. Bring up some of the kids, play them for a little while, and then go out and try and be competitive in the free agent market, and see what you can do next year, and try and be competitive next year with one more year of Bo and Vladdy. So I think that's what they're going to do. And my whole point is that, I don't think to be clear, I don't think Ross Atkins is going to be fired. But if you're going to do that, I mean, like, I don't trust him to do that. So he should be fired before that is a possibility, before you say, yeah, we're going to do that. Let's give the keys to somebody else. Maybe Shapiro just does it himself. Like, maybe he fires Ross Atkins and just like takes on that role for the interim until the off season to find somebody else.
Like you said, with that renovation, they need to get people in the seats, right? So do you think they, let's say, keep Bo, keep Vladdy, keep Jansen, and get rid of some of the prospects for maybe bigger bats? Like, you maybe trade Orelvis Martinez or Addison. Uh, can't think of his last name now.
Addison Barger.
I'm just yeah, but like, I'm not saying, or like Spencer Horwitz. I'm not saying do it, but I'm like,
No.
would that be an option to say, now you do, yeah, you deplete your farm system, but if you say, well, Vladdy still has years and he's entering his prime if he's not in his prime. Bo, Jansen, you sign those guys, and then you get more of something back from like a team that is definitely out of it. Like Oakland, I think, let's say they have their reliever there, or, do you get rid of some of your prospects for these more bats that will contribute now?
That's what you do when you're close. That's what you do when you're at 500 and you need to make the push to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a scenario where you're below 500 and you decided we're sellers. So yeah, maybe that happens, but again, that happens, in that sort of 20th percentile situation where they've come back and they've won maybe a 8-game win streak, and now they're above 500 again, and it's like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, and that's the norm, but maybe they do something different. Again, I don't know. I'm not a GM. I'm just kind of putting it out there just to see if there's maybe a different way to look at it.
Well, Rob, I think Dustin is right in terms of that's what you do when you're close, right? The problem
Right.
is that the Blue Jays don't have the prospect capital to eat. I don't think they even have it to do what you want to do. And guess who's responsible for that? Ross Atkins.
Well, they've done that for the last couple of years, right?
Well, they have, but the farm system is bottom 3 in the league, and that's with Ricky Tiedemann being down there, who's, I think, he's the top left-handed pitching prospect in baseball, right? So that's with him down there. If he makes it to the big leagues, right? Like, it just gets worse. Orelvis Martinez, I don't know. I don't know if I wanna trade him, and I'll tell you why. Like, his biggest upside is his power, right? What is this team lacking? Power, slugging, right? Like, this is the stuff that I don't want to. I don't want to give up players like this just for some short-term fix, which is probably not going to do anything anyway. Like, in your response, there were like 4 different things that need to be dealt with, all of which, like, what happens with Jansen, Bo and Vladdy, like, all, what I've heard all week. I've listened to a lot of shows and podcasts this week. Why haven't the Jays signed Bo and Vladdy? Well, I don't know if we know why. I think there's a difference in valuation between what the Jays want to sign them for and probably what the players feel that they're worth, and that's probably a problem. But like Kansas City locking up Bobby Witt Jr., right? Generational shortstop, right? Like, if the Kansas City fucking Royals can lock up Bobby Witt Jr.? Why can't the Blue Jays lock up Bo Bichette? We know why, because they don't want to plunk down the money, right? And you know what? On top, let's look at it on the other side. Why would you, as Bo Bichette? Because I think Vladdy seems like he would. I think the issue with Vladdy is like pay, right? I think he would sign long term with Toronto. But why would Bo Bichette, who has no connection to this city or at all, like why would he sign with Toronto and not the Dodgers or whoever? Like why? Like especially with Ross Atkins in charge. Like I think Mark Shapiro needs to shake-hand Ross Atkins to show everybody that he's serious and that this organization is not a complete joke, right? Like I don't know. Like that's where I'm at, and I think the team has been running the ground. I think especially after that whole Barrios shenanigans last year, and we keep on bringing it up because the team sucks this year, so why wouldn't we? But we keep on bringing it up. I think there's a big gap in the players' confidence and this just organization in general. And who knows? Like maybe you have players kind of wondering where their future is, right? Danny Jansen, he seems to hit really well when he's healthy, but he's not healthy very often. So do you re-sign him, right? Like there's so many decisions that have to be made, and like just in even what you said, and that's beyond, is Addison Barger going to be a major leaguer, right? If he's not, okay, do you package him off with someone else, to somewhere else? Where do you see Aurelvis Martinez? When do you see him breaking through? Like there's so many questions with this team, and there are no answers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be repeating myself, but I think the move is sell what you can, let the kids play, and try and be competitive on the free agent market in the off season. And I think you can kind of get back to competitiveness. I think they have a pretty good pitching staff, which goes a long way. And all you really need is some retooling, and I think there's some opportunity to be competitive next year. I don't think, it's a blow it up situation. But again, I don't trust Ross Atkins to do any of that. So
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement with that.
Oh, I'm not. All right, because what I think should happen. I think what should happen is that this team should be totally blown up. All right, because I think that's a short-term fix, Dustin. And I'm not saying that I think I would also, there's a part of me that would also like the fact that this team is actually competitive, of course, right? But this team doesn't even, like, when you look at the Blue Jays, you don't even know, like, when you see the Baltimore Orioles, right? They're young, hit for power, they slug. They picked up some pitchers this offseason. Like you
how many years were they bad to get to that spot?
They were very bad. And this is also another problem too. So we've now in this spot, whereas if you do go that way, like that's pretty dark. And in the AL East, like rebuilding takes a while. But what I'm saying is that I think this team needs like a rebuild, like its ethos, right? Like how it plays, like what kind of players it wants to sign. Like I think everything about this team is like people are asking questions, and I don't think a lot of it makes sense, right? Like I want to know, like, is this, everybody seems to want a team that hits home runs, fine, and I think I like that, but maybe that's the kind of team that Toronto wants, is we want guys who bash, right? I think I want a little bit more than that, right? But I don't know. I think that this team needs to have more of an identity than just, we're latching on to two former major league players' sons who are really good, and we're just going to try to ride them, and instead they ran it into the ground.
Well, I mean, they made a gamble and they lost, and I mean that's the way it goes sometimes. The fact is that they probably haven't been very good at drafting, and their farm system isn't great right now. And a rebuild would require somebody that's actually good at drafting and is good at making trades and building from the ground up. So either way, whether you do what you're saying or you're doing what I'm saying, You need somebody that's not Ross Atkins that can make a good, like, if you're doing what I'm saying, you need somebody that can make some good, smart trades here in the trade deadline, can maybe bolster the farm system a little bit, that can convince some people to sign in the offseason and can actually trade or actually draft well in the coming years so that there's somebody coming up behind these guys. If you're doing what you're saying, it's the same deal. You need somebody that can do that. And we're at the point, whatever, 7 years or however long it's been with this front office, and this is what we're talking about, so it's obviously not worked. And so, I don't trust him to do it again.
We are in agreement. Rob, I'll give you the last word.
I'm buying what your guys are selling. He's not doing Ross Atkins isn't doing a good job, and we can talk about the players not hitting. We can talk about poor management from Schneider, but at the end of the day, Atkins is the fall guy, and he's got to go sooner rather than later would be best. I don't think it would happen, but yeah, we're all in agreement that he's the problem.
All right, gentlemen, I really appreciate the time, and thank you very much for joining me tonight.